Okay, so when I say the words biblical giants, what pops into your head? You're probably picturing these massive, towering figures, right? Like Goliath, beings of just incredible physical size and strength. But what if that whole image, what if it misses the point completely? Today, we're diving into a totally different way of looking at one of the Bible's most fascinating subjects. And look, this whole idea, it comes from famous scriptures just like this one in Genesis 6. It talks about giants and mighty men. And yeah, for centuries, people have taken that literally. Super tall, super strong guys. But the source material we're digging into today asks us to, press pause and reconsider that whole assumption. And that right there is the big question we're tackling. What if the word giant wasn't about a person's physical height at all? What if it was really a description of the state of their soul? A label for someone whose actions were so extreme, so powerful, that they seemed to be driven by some kind of unseen, inhuman force. This brings us straight to the main idea, the core thesis, from our source material by author Daniel NB Lamptey. He makes the case that the biblical idea of giants is fundamentally a spiritual concept, not a physical one. So let's break down exactly what he means by that. So let's put these two ideas side by side. It really helps to see the difference. On one hand, you have the common view that we all know. Giants are about physical size, superhuman strength, maybe the offspring of angels and men. But on the other hand, the author's view flips all of that. Instead of physical stature, think spiritual possession. Instead of superhuman strength, it's a demonic force. And their origin? Not a physical union, but the deep corruption of a human soul.
Okay, so this is super important. For the rest of our chat, whenever we use the word giant, this is the definition we're working with. According to the source, it has nothing to do with how someone looks on the outside. It's all about what's going on inside. It's a term for a human being whose soul has been taken over, causing them to do things of extreme wickedness and power.
To really wrap our heads around this, the author points us to a really famous story from the New Testament. And it's not a story about a physically huge man, but it is about someone whose behavior was just terrifyingly inhuman. Let's take a look at the man of Gadara. Think about this guy's situation as it's described in the Bible. It was absolutely extreme. He had a kind of strength that could literally shatter chains. He lived among the tombs, totally cut off from society. He was in constant torment, crying out day and night. And the source we're exploring zeroes in on a key detail. He was allegedly possessed by a legion of demons, which is estimated to be around 5,000, and argues this was the real source of his incredible power.
And that is the key point the author is making. The man of Gadara was a giant in this view, not because he was 10 feet tall, but because of the immense demonic force that was operating through him. He was essentially a living example of a human soul completely overpowered by an outside spiritual influence.
All right, but what about those Old Testament giants, huh? The ones the Israelites were told to go fight in the promised land of Canaan. The source tackles this exact question head-on, not with a simple answer, but by posing a series of really interesting logical questions. The first piece of this puzzle is Rahab, the Canaanite woman from Jericho. The author basically asks, if all the Canaanite men were literal physical giants, how in the world would her profession as a prostitute have even been physically possible, let alone survivable? It's a blunt question, but it's meant to challenge the literal interpretation. And here's the real kicker. Not only did Rahab survive, but she went on to marry a regular-sized Israelite man named Salmon, and their marriage is a crucial part of the direct lineage of the Messiah. The author argues that this just doesn't make sense biologically, if she and her people were a different gigantic species. The conclusion, then, must be that their giant status was spiritual, not physical.
Okay, so if these giants are the result of demonic possession, how does that happen to a whole group of people, to entire generations? Well, the source suggests a very specific mechanism, a powerful curse that spiritually exposes an entire bloodline, like opening a door that was meant to be locked.
This table lays out the two main examples the book uses to explain this. First up is Cain, who was cursed directly by God. According to the author, Cain's descendants became those giants from Genesis 6, the ones whose corruption became so widespread that it led to the Great Flood. The second example is Canaan, who was cursed by his grandfather Noah. His descendants became the giant peoples of the Promised Land, who were ultimately judged by the sword of Israel. So the author lays out this really clear 4-step process for how this all supposedly happens. Step 1, a curse is spoken over a person or a whole bloodline.
Step 2, that curse spiritually isolates them, stripping away what the text calls their divine covering or protection. Step 3, this leaves the soul totally exposed and vulnerable, giving Satan access. And finally, step 4, demons can now invade that unprotected soul, and that's what ultimately creates a so-called giant.
Now you might be thinking, okay, this is all fascinating ancient theology, but what does it have to do with today? Well, the source argues that this spiritual dynamic has very real, very present-day implications. The author refers to them as seeds from the giants. Okay, and this next part is presented directly from the source material. The author goes on to identify these specific behaviors and identities as what he believes are modern expressions of the same ancient spiritual influence. The argument being made in the book is that these are not natural human states, but are actually the result of demonic forces corrupting human souls. To be really clear about the author's own stated intention, the book includes the specific message. It says the point isn't to judge or condemn any individual. The stated purpose is, instead, to reveal what the author believes is the spiritual influence behind identities that he asserts are outside of a divine design. And this is a really important point in the book. It doesn't just end on a note of judgment or condemnation. It actually stresses that from this spiritual perspective, the situation is not hopeless. It points towards what it calls a divine solution for anyone who feels trapped in this situation or is looking for a way out. Just so everyone's on the same page, all of the ideas, arguments, and quotes we've been walking through today are drawn from excerpts of the book The Lamb, the Cross, and the Water by Daniel NB Lamptey. So, this whole reinterpretation of giants leaves us with a pretty big idea to chew on. It challenges us to ask ourselves, what if the most important struggles described in ancient texts, and maybe even the ones we face today, aren't against flesh and blood at all, but against spiritual forces that we can't even see? Look, if this breakdown got you thinking and you want to dive deeper, the full argument is right there in the book. It's a seriously thought-provoking read, and I highly recommend checking it out. You can find it on Amazon.com. Hey, thanks so much for joining me for this explainer.